today you are going to build and deploy a dog gallery application to where this is the final project here to where we have built and deployed this project using Vercel, in which we're going to be able to select the number of dogs we want to see. Let's see the maximum dogs. Let's fetch those dogs, pun intended. And then we see a gallery of 10 different dogs here with a fully kind of responsive page here to where we get to see some cute little doggos. I think that's a Samoyed. It's a beautiful dog. Got some, I think, Birdie's Bow dogs here and just a bunch of cool other dogs. Then we can go to our navigation here, but then we can see all dogs. So this API that we're using allows us to fetch all dogs here, in which we can see 50 different dogs here, just random dogs, which what could be better than this? So we're going to build this cool little application here that has some kind of navigation. I think this is a very beginner friendly application and can help you. Like if you're just getting into Next.js, I think this is great. If you're refreshing your skills, I think this is great. If you want somewhere to start as just like an idea for an application and then go and build something cooler on top of this, I think this is also great for that. And I mentioned API a second ago. So we're going to use this dog API. You can see it's dog.co/dog API/dog documentation. I almost said documentation, which is a nice little Freudian slip there. But we're going to use this just free API that we don't need any account or any API keys to build this application as well. So without further ado, let's head over to VS Code and start building this dog gallery application. So here in VS Code, the first thing that we're going to do is run the command in our terminal npx create-next-app at latest. And then we're going to name this project, or at least I'm going to name it dog-gallery. I'm not going to use TypeScript. Usually I don't use TypeScript in my projects just because my philosophy is that to make these projects more accessible to everybody, if you know TypeScript, you should be able to do this project in TypeScript. But if you don't know TypeScript, then this is going to be kind of a tricky project to do. Just because TypeScript is a whole kind of another thing in itself. Not to say it's like crazy hard or anything, but it just does add a decent amount to projects. So I'm not going to use it. I do have courses on TypeScript though. No ESLint. We are going to use Tailwind CSS. I'm not going to focus too much on styling here in this project, but we are going to use Tailwind, and I would recommend you do the same because there are going to be places to where I stop and recommend like you copy and paste some styles that I've already created for this project. And then we're not going to use an SRC directory. We are going to use app router, and we are not going to customize the default import alias. So I'm going to go ahead and let this generate a kind of template project here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do file, open, and then open this project within VS Code. So now with this project open, we're going to see that it creates our app folder. It also creates like our Next.js config, our Tailwind config, and just kind of templates out our project. So we come to our app folder, we see we have a page.js page. As you guys know, if you've watched previous tutorials of mine, I'm going to change this to JSX for two reasons. One, I just like the blue kind of icon better. And then two, it's going to give me better code completion within my code editor. So I'm going to remove that. And all of this, I'm just going to do Command A and delete and get rid of this entire page, because we're going to kind of structure this page out, and then we're going to create the different components to basically make this project, or at least this page of our project. We're going to add one more page here, but we'll get to that in a second. So first off, this is going to be a client component here. I'm not really worried about making this entire page a client component because it's just like kind of a small project here. So there's not really many downsides to doing that. And then we're going to import use state from React. And I'm going to get rid of that extra curly brace. And then below this, we're going to export a default function And I'm going to just call this, I don't know, dogs page. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of template out what we're going to return here. So we're going to return, let's just return a wrapper div. And now below this, for this dogs page, what I'm kind of imagining in my head is that we're going to have like an input selector that's going to allow them to select like how many dogs they want to see, or the API that we're using here that I ideally showed you in the introduction of this. And I say ideally because I typically record the introductions after I've already created the project, just to kind of show you guys what we're going to build and stuff. But basically for this, you can send up to 50 dogs to be returned here. So I'm thinking we create a selector to where they can maybe select, maybe just 1 through 10 images that they can view. We could increase that, but 1 through 10 seems like a reasonable thing to do. You could do 1 through 50, of course, but maybe they have a selector component that they can have here. So let's just kind of template out a selector, and I'm going to just comment that out right now. So a selector for them. And then we'll probably also have like a button that says fetch dogs, pun definitely intended. So we could do just like a generic button that maybe we pass a couple props to, like button text and handle click. And then we also, after they select how many dogs they want to do and they click the button to fetch their dogs, we will then display like maybe just a kind of dog gallery here. Now, for this, and that's just going to show the images, maybe just using like Flexbox to wrap the images down the page. Now for this button here that's going to fetch or handle the fetching of our dogs, I'm going to make this a server action. That's generally the kind of recommended way to kind of do data mutations and fetch data in Next.js. So we're going to make that a server action, but we need to start kind of building out these components here. So let's first build this selector component, and then we'll kind of slot that in. So for the selector component, it's going to need to basically set the number of dogs, because once we have the number of dogs that they want to fetch, we'll need to pass that to this button that will handle the fetching of the dogs, because we need to know the number of dogs to fetch. So let's do const and create a piece of React state here. Number of dogs, comma, set number of dogs is equal to use state. And let's just default it to 1 dog here at the start. And then we will eventually pass that as a prop, the set number of dogs and number of dogs, to this selector component here. So let's go ahead and in my app directory, let's create a components folder. This is generally how I've been liking to structure things, is creating a components folder within the app directory and then creating or adding the components I'm going to use in that folder. So within that components folder, let's create a selector.jsx component here. And for the selector component, we're going to export a default function called selector. And for the props here, we should probably pass in like some sort of like label text, as well as a handle change function, as well as the value for the selector to make it a controlled component. So that handle change function, it's going to be related to setting the number of dogs after the user selects them. And the value is going to be the number of dogs. So within these props here, I'm just going to pass in an object here to automatically destructure label text, as well as handle change, as well as value. And then for the return statement here, we will just return a div, and then this will have a label, we'll fill in the HTML for here in just a second. I guess I can just call this number of dogs here at the start. We will render our label text here within our label. And then we'll have a select element in which we won't add a name right now, but we will have an ID that is going to be our number of dogs. And then the value is going to be set to our value. And then our on change is going to be set to our handle change. And then we'll add some styles here in a second, but let me format this down to a different line. Generally, I would recommend you using Prettier and setting that up within your Next.js projects. Maybe I should create a tutorial on just setting up Prettier in a Next.js project in VS Code. I think that's actually a decent idea. So for the select component, we basically need to render like 10 different options. Now, kind of I don't know, I think it's a clever way. You might not think it's that clever, but what we could do is we could actually do an array here. So I'm going to do curly braces and then open up square brackets. I'm going to do ... array. So we're using the array constructor function. I'm going to call this and I'm going to pass in 10. So it's going to give us 10 different options, and I'm going to call .keys, and we're going to call that. And then what we're going to do, so what this is doing is it's basically creating an array of 10. And for this array of 10, we're then just going to map over this array, and I accidentally turned caps lock on, and we're going to get a number. And then we are going to do an implicit return with an arrow function, and we're going to render out an option. And this option is going to have a value of our num plus 1, because option 1 should have the value of 1, but this num here is going to be an index. So we want to make sure, and which is going to be 0 based. So we want to do, the first one is going to be 0 plus 1 is 1. And then the next index is going to be 1 plus 1 is 2, and so on and so forth. And then we'll also set the same thing for the key here. Since we're mapping over it, we need to add a key. So I'll do key is equal to num plus 1 as well. And then within my option, as you guessed, it's also going to be num plus 1. And now that I'm kind of doing this, it might actually be better to restructure this in which instead of doing an implicit return, we do an explicit return here, but then we say const, maybe unique value is equal to num plus 1. And then in all these places that we use num plus 1, we just use that variable. That's generally a better practice than repeating ourselves in every single instance without using a variable. And apart from that, we need to add some classes here. So I'm going to mostly copy these from my final GitHub, which you can do as well. I'll have a GitHub linked in the description here, but I'm going to add a class name to my wrapper div. And then I'm also going to add a class name to my label component here, like so. And then I'm also going to add a class name to my select component. And in the future, we will just copy and paste like the entire kind of return statement here, but I kind of adjusted my return statement because of this kind of logic right here. But that should be all we need for classes. And then here within my page.jsx, we can now just use my selector component here. Now we need to add a label text here. So I'm going to say select, or maybe I'll say, how many dogs do you want to fetch? And then question mark. And then I also want to add some styles to my wrapper div here. So I'm going to do this. And then we need to add and let me move this to a new line here because we're going to add some more props. So new line. Let's move this down. And for the handle change, we're going to make this a function that accepts an event. And we are going to set the number of dogs to be the event.target.value. And then we need to set the value of the selector is going to equal the number of dogs. So if I didn't mess anything up yet, which if you've watched my tutorials, you know isn't always the case, I'm going to do npm run dev in the terminal, and this should start a project up on localhost 3000. So let's head over, and I'm getting a nice ad here. Get off my screen, please. And we're going to go to localhost 3000. I'm going to refresh this page, and we do indeed see a nice little selector here that looks to be working as expected. So, hey, we are off to a good start. I haven't messed up anything yet, but just give me a chance. I'm sure it'll happen here eventually. So now that we have that in place, I think we're ready to create this button that is going to fetch the number of dogs. So let's go ahead and in our components file, let's create a new file and then create a button.jsx file. And I meant to say my components folder. And this button's going to be very simple. It's just going to export a default function, and it's going to be button, and then it's going to destructure props here again, and it's just going to destructure handle click as well as a button text. And then for this button, we're just going to return an HTML button here, and we are going to set the on click is going to be the handle click. And then we're also going to set some classes here, which I'm going to copy and paste from my GitHub that you, of course, can do as well. And then here, we just set the button text, and that's all we need for this button here. So for this, we can render out our button component now. And for this button component, we need to render out our button text as well as our handle click. So for our button text, let's go ahead and just do maybe fetch to go along with our kind of cheesy dog theme that we have going on. And then for the handle click, let's go ahead and create a handle fetch function. So I think for this handle fetch function, I can probably put this outside of my dogs page here, unless I break something. But I think I can do const handle fetch is equal to async function that is going to, actually, I want this to be inside my dogs page because we're going to set some state here. I could pass the state setter, but I'm not really worried about reinitializing this function. So we will set the dog. Well, we're going to have to set dog state here, but I'm going to set some dog images. And what we're going to do is we're going to await a server action that we'll create. And it's going to be called fetch dogs, and it's going to pass in the number of dogs. Now we need to create the state for dog images. So I'm going to say const dog images that we will eventually pass to our dog gallery, and set dog images is equal to use state, and then just initialize it as an empty array. And then this handle fetch, like I said, it's going to be a function to where when they click on this fetch button, it is going to await calling a server action that is going to fetch the dogs based on the number of dogs they want to fetch. And this server action should return an array of dog images that we can render out in our dog gallery. So now what we want to do is create a fetch dogs server action. So let's go ahead. I'm going to save this file within my app folder here. I'm going to create an actions.js file. And in this actions.js file, we're going to make this a server component. So I'm going to say use server here, or a server action, I should say. And we're going to export a default function called fetch dogs, and it's going to accept the number of dogs that we want to fetch. And then this is where we're going to make a fetch request to that API that I showed you a little bit earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to try, and we're going to wrap this in a try catch block to try to handle exceptions as best as possible. We're going to call the response, and we're going to await fetching this API. So we're going to use backticks, and this is going to be, and you can read the API documentation for how to fetch this API, but it's very straightforward, and we don't even need an API key, which is actually super nice. It's going to be https://dog.ceo/API/breeds, and this should be a /breeds/image/random/ curly brace number of dogs. So we're going to fetch dog.ceo API breeds image random, and then set the number of dogs that we want to fetch. And then here we will say if not response.ok. If we don't get an OK response here, we're going to throw an error, in which we are going to throw a new error and say network response for fetching dogs was not okay. But if that's not a thing, then we'll say const data is equal to await response.json, call that function. So we need to convert it to JSON, and then we will return our dogs. So we're going to return our data, and it's going to be on the message property. It's going to be our array of dogs. And you can see the structure of this return or the API response in their documentation, but the dogs are going to be on the response dot or the data dot message. And we'll make sure to catch an error, and we will just for now console dot error, and then we'll just console log the error. And then I need to make sure that this is an export default async function. And then it also should not be a default export. It should just be export async function, fetch dogs. And then if there is an error, we will just return an empty array. So this should be all we need for our server action here. So let's come back. And now for this fetch dogs function, I should be able to just do fetch dogs, importing it from /actions, and then we set our dog images. So now let's just console.log our dog images here and see if we get some dog images back. So you see, we now have this fetch button. I'm going to just do a hard refresh to make sure. I'm going to open the console, and then we will do, let's do 4. So we have no dog images right now, which is expected because I didn't press fetch. If I click fetch, we should see I now get some dog images here, and it's an array of 4. And all these are URLs that point to different dog images. So this looks to be working as expected here. We are able to fetch our dog images. So this all looks good. And now that we have the selector to fetch these images, we can just create our dog gallery here. Now we are going to create another page here, but we'll cover that in a second. And that page will actually go pretty quickly once we get this dog gallery put together. So let's now create a new file and just call this dog gallery.jsx. And then we're going to export a default function dog gallery. It's going to accept one prop that is going to be the dog images. And then we are going to return, and this is going to be just a wrapper div here. And then we're going to map over our dog images. So dog images dot map. We're going to call this function. We're going to take an image, and then we are going to return a div in which we're going to set a key is going to just be our image. So they're going to be different URLs. And then we're going to render an image component from Next.js. So I'm going to render an image, importing that from next image. And then we're going to add some props here. So the src is going to be equal to image. The alt is going to be equal to dog. We're going to fill, set that to true. For a class name, we're going to set it to rounded large or large. And then we're going to do style is equal to object fit cover. And then for our sizes, what we're going to do is we're going to set parenthesis max hyphen width is, and this comes from the Next.js docs of how to set this stuff, this amount of pixels, close parenthesis, 100 VW, comma, and then we'll do max hyphen width is 1024 pixel, close that parenthesis, 50 VW, comma, 25 VW. And then I'm also going to add some classes here to this wrapper div, like so. And then I'm also going to add some classes to the wrapper div of my image right here. And then I also add this style of min height is 300 pixels. So this is our dog gallery, and it's pretty basic Tailwind CSS here. It's just setting this to flexbox and to flex wrap. And then there are, like, this was a little bit tricky getting the image sizing right to the point to where it looked okay. But I think this should look okay here. So now back into our page, we should be able to render our dog gallery, importing that from our components. And then we should be able to set the dog images to our dog images. And I can return this console.log. Now, I expect to get an error here. And yeah, I'll just show you the error that we're going to get. If I do 3 and then I fetch this, you see invalid src prop on my image component because I haven't set the host name of images.dog.co. So based on some optimizations that Next.js does for their image component, I need to make sure to set this images domain. So where we set that is in the next config.mjs. I need to set an images property, and this is going to point to an object that has domains. And then this domains object is going to have an images.dog.ceo here. And I think that this should fix it. For some reason, I was thinking that that domains prop might have gotten deprecated. I actually forget at this point. Let's see if it gives us any console errors here. And I don't see any console errors, so I'm going to leave it. There's a chance that I need to structure that next config a little bit differently. So if you're getting any console errors, I don't seem to be, but if you are, make sure to adjust that if you're going to use this in production and stuff, but I don't see, and let me check. So I actually do see it. Please use images.remote patterns configuration instead. So images, and then I'll do remote patterns, and then do I still need to do domains? And I need to use this sort of structure. So images, and then I'm going to just copy this. Let's come back. Let's remove this. So it should be remote patterns. So it is HTTPS, but since I copied that, I lose what I had earlier, but I think it's like images.dog.ceo. And then I don't think I need a path name here. And I think this should do it here. So let me run, I think I crashed my server, npm run dev here again, localhost 3000. Let me come back. Let me fetch these guys. And I get an error, expected a non-empty string. And I still get an issue, which I think I can actually just remove those. And testing this again, I can actually just remove those. So what this should look like is just protocol, HTTPS, hostname, images.dog.co. I had a feeling that was deprecated, but I wasn't for sure. So as you can see, we actually see our cute little doggies here. So let's do 8 dogs and refetch those. And then we see we have a list of 8. We see we have decent responsiveness here, which they kind of get resized here for our different page size. So nice. And then we have all these here. So cool. We've kind of set this up in just a little bit of time here. But let's add one more thing here. So I want to actually add a component that is going to allow us to navigate to an all dogs page. So we're going to render a navigation component within our layout, just to kind of add a little bit more here to this project. So let's add a navigation.jsx component, in which this is going to be a client component. And we're going to import use state from React. And then what we're going to do is export a default function called navigation. And then I'm going to make sure to spell function correctly here. And then what we need to do here at the top of this function is set some state called isOpen, as well as set isOpen. And this is going to be what we use to basically say whether our navigation is open or close or not. And then I need to make sure this is equal to use state. And then what we're going to return is a wrapper div. And then it's going to have a button in which the on click of this button is basically just going to set isOpen to not isOpen. So if the navigation is open, then this button should close it. If the navigation is closed, then it should open it. And then within this button, let's actually render out, we're going to render out a div with 3 empty spans within this div. And we'll add the classes here in a sec. But this is going to be us styling just like a hamburger icon. And then below this button, we'll do another div. And then this div is going to wrap around some links that we're going to have. So we're going to use the link component from Next.js. We're going to have one of our links navigate to just an empty / which is going to be our home link. So let's call this home. And then below this, we're going to do another link component in which the href is going to be a link to a page that is going to show all dogs. We're going to render out 50 dogs. So it's going to be / all dogs that we'll create here in just a second. And then it'll say see all dogs. And now I'm going to copy and paste quite a bit of CSS or Tailwind CSS from my repository that you also have access to. So I'm going to add that here, and then you can see hamburger icon as well as navigation links. And there's also a little bit of logic here in the class names, which you can read into a little bit more if you want to see kind of how that's working. But now with this in place, I want to go ahead and render this within our layout component here, because we want this navigation to show on all of our pages, and this layout component wraps all of our pages. So let's go ahead and render out our navigation from our components here. And if I refresh my page here, we should now see, I'm going to close that, this navigation component that can link us to home and see all dogs here. So let's now create our all dogs page. So all we need to do for this is within our app directory, we need to create a new folder called all-dogs. And within this folder, we need to create a page.jsx to create a public route within this folder. And let's just export default async function called dogs page. And we're going to say const dogs is equal to await. And then we will use our fetch dogs server action. And then let's actually set a constant called max dogs and set that equal to 50 because that is the max dogs. And then we will fetch our 50 dogs here. And then what we're going to do is return a wrapper div that has an h2 that says to see new dogs, do a hard refresh by pressing Command plus Shift plus R. Maybe capital R makes sense with Shift. And then we just need to render our dogs gallery that we've already created. And we will set our dog images to be our dogs. And I'm going to add some styles here to my wrapper div as well as to my h2 elements here that you can also, of course, copy and paste. So you just see I added some class names here. And now when we go to this all dogs page at /all dogs, and this automatically created a public route because we created a page.jsx, they should be able to see this dogs page that just basically renders a dog gallery of all 50 dogs. So if I come back and I refresh, we should be able to go to see all dogs here. And then we see to see new dogs. So let me close this, do a hard refresh of the page by pressing Command Shift R. And we see all of these cute doggos here, all 50 of them. If I do Command Shift R, we see some new dogs. So this looks to be working correctly. And if I go to home and we just want to see 5 dogs, we fetch those, we see 5 doggos. So let's go ahead and go to Vercel and let's deploy this project as well. So first up, I'm going to go to GitHub here and I'm going to create so I hit the plus icon within my GitHub to create a new. I'm going to just call this dogs gallery. And I'm going to create a new repo. I'm going to copy this git remote add origin here. I'm going to go back to my terminal and I'm going to just clear this console here. I'm going to do git add, git commit, add project, and I'm going to do git add remote add origin, and I'm going to do git push, and I'm going to do git push set upstream here. And now if I go back to GitHub, I should see our project here, but now I'm going to go to vercel.com and I'm here at vercel.com/dashboard. You might need to connect this to your GitHub, which I've already done and I'm already logged in here, which is why you see some different projects that I have here. But it should be very straightforward for you to connect vercel.com to GitHub. And what we're going to do here is click add new from our dashboard, add a new project. From my repository, I'm going to click dogs gallery. I'm going to import that. And then I'm just going to click deploy. And then after a few seconds here, I'll wait for this to do its thing, but it should deploy our new project at our own URL. And then after a few seconds here, you should see, congratulations, you just deployed a new project. If we click on this, we should see at your URL might look different, but we now have our own custom URL here in which I can see all of my dogs still. I can go to my homepage. I can click 8. I can click fetch, and then I can still see all of my dogs. Nice little image of this person here. Let's do die just to get rid of that person. some cute little birdies, mountain dogs. I can't tell if this is a German Shepherd or a Belgian Malinois. I think maybe a Malinois. That's also a cute dog. As you guys know, I have a German Shepherd, which is what this looks like. That is not me though, don't worry. But yeah, you can see our project looks like it works and we have deployed it. So thank you so much for tuning into this project. Hopefully that was a fun kind of little project for you to build. And I think it was a really good kind of beginner project. And, we built like kind of a cool project here in the matter of, 45 minutes or so. So yeah, thanks for tuning into this and I'll see you in that next one.